The strange hygiene rituals of medieval times. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're traveling back to medieval Europe where the concept of hygiene was, well, let's just say it was very different from what you're used to. Tonight, you'll experience what it was really like to live when soap was a luxury, baths were dangerous, and your daily routine involved more dirt than a modern gardener sees in a month. So settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's step into a world where cleanliness wasn't next to godliness, it was next to impossible. The first thing you notice as consciousness creeps into your mind is the smell. It's not the gentle aroma of coffee brewing or fresh bread. It's the thick layered scent of unwashed bodies, damp straw, and something that might generously be called human musk, but could more accurately be described as the essence of not having bathed in 3 months. You open your eyes, and the pale morning light filters through the single small window of your one-room home. The glass is thick, uneven, and so grimy that it barely lets in any light at all. But that's probably for the best, because what you're about to see wouldn't look much better in bright sunlight. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a simple wooden frame filled with straw that's been compressed into something resembling a mattress. The straw hasn't been changed in months, and it's home to more creatures than you care to count. Fleas hop enthusiastically from the bedding to your skin, treating you like their personal breakfast buffet. Lice have set up what appears to be a thriving civilization in your hair, and somewhere in the straw you can hear the gentle scratching of mice who've decided your sleeping arrangements are perfectly suited to their needs as well. You share this space with your entire family. Your parents sleep on one side, your 3 siblings on the other, and you're wedged somewhere in the middle with about as much personal space as a sardine in a can. Privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist. When someone tosses and turns, everyone feels it. When someone snores, everyone hears it. And when someone has digestive issues from last night's questionable porridge, well, everyone knows about it. The floor beneath your bed is hard-packed dirt covered with rushes that were once green but have long since turned brown and musty. These rushes are supposed to be changed regularly, but regularly, in medieval terms, means when they start growing things that shouldn't be growing indoors. Sometimes that's every few months. Sometimes it's never. As you sit up, your body protests with a symphony of aches and pains. The straw mattress offers about as much support as a wet towel, and your back feels like it's been used as a medieval torture device. Your neck is stiff, your shoulders are sore, and there's a mysterious pain in your hip that you're pretty sure came from sleeping on an uneven lump of something that might have been a turnip. But the real challenge of your morning routine hasn't even begun yet. You need to relieve yourself, and in medieval times, this isn't the simple private affair you might be used to. There's no bathroom down the hall, no toilet paper neatly arranged on a roll, and certainly no flush toilet waiting to whisk away your problems with a satisfying whoosh. Instead, you have a few options, none of them particularly appealing. If you're fortunate enough to live in a town, you might have access to a communal latrine, a wooden structure built over a deep pit shared with your neighbors. The smell is so potent that it could probably be used as a weapon of war. The wooden seats are worn smooth by countless users, and the privacy consists of thin wooden walls that do little to muffle the sounds of your fellow citizens going about their business. But more likely, you're using a chamber pot, a ceramic or wooden bowl that sits beside your bed. It's already partially full from last night's contributions from your family members, and the smell is, well, imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered, then multiply that by about 10 and let it ferment for a week. You do what you must, trying to breathe through your mouth and ignore the sounds of your family members stirring in their beds just a few feet away. When you're finished, you'll need to empty the chamber pot, which means carrying it outside and dumping it into the street. Yes, the street. This is where the charming medieval custom of shouting, "Gardy Lou," comes in a warning to passersby that waste is about to rain down from above. The streets of medieval towns are essentially open sewers, flowing with a mixture of human waste, animal droppings, kitchen scraps, and rainwater. The smell is overwhelming, and the sight is worse. You learn to watch where you step because slipping in this medieval soup could mean more than just embarrassment. It could mean serious illness or infection. For wiping, you have several options, all of them rougher than sandpaper. Straw is common if you can find some that isn't already decomposing. Leaves work if it's the right season, though you have to be careful not to choose anything that might cause a rash. Moss is popular among those who can find it, and rays, if you have any to spare, are considered quite luxurious. Some people use nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't particularly popular in medieval society. Now that you've handled your most pressing bodily needs, it's time to prepare for the day ahead. In modern times, this might involve a shower, brushing your teeth, and perhaps applying some deodorant. In medieval times, it involves, well, not much really. You start with your clothes, which are the same clothes you wore yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. In fact, these are probably the only clothes you own. You have a rough wool tunic or a linen shift that's been your constant companion for months, possibly years. It's stained with sweat, food, dirt, and substances you prefer not to identify. The fabric is stiff with accumulated grime, and it smells like a mixture of barnyard animals and fermented vegetables. But here's the thing about medieval clothing. It's not supposed to be washed frequently. In fact, many people believe that washing clothes too often weakens the fibers and shortens their lifespan. Since you can't exactly pop down to the medieval mall to pick up a new outfit, you need to make your clothes last as long as possible. The process of washing clothes is also incredibly laborious. You'd need to heat water over a fire, find some kind of soap or lye scrub the clothes on a wooden board, rinse them thoroughly, and then hang them to dry. In a world where every minute of daylight is needed for survival, spending an entire day washing clothes is a luxury most people can't afford. So you pull on your crusty, aromatic tunic and try to ignore the way it chafes against your skin. If you're lucky, you might have a linen undergarment, but more likely, you're going commando under layers of scratchy wool. The fabric rubs against your skin with every movement, creating a constant low-level irritation that you learn to live with. Your shoes, if you have any, are made of untreated leather that's been stitched together with whatever materials were available. They offer about as much arch support as a slice of bread and provide minimal protection from the elements. The soles are thin and worn, and they leak whenever it rains, which is often. Many people simply go barefoot, navigating the hazardous terrain of medieval streets with nothing but their own skin to protect them. You develop thick, calloused feet that can handle sharp stones and broken pottery, but you also risk injury, infection, and parasites with every step. Now comes the question that's probably been nagging at you: when do you get to wash? When do you get to soap up, rinse off, and emerge feeling clean and refreshed? The answer, unfortunately, is not very often. And when you do, it's not the pleasant experience you might imagine. Medieval attitudes toward bathing were complicated. On one hand, there was some understanding that cleanliness could be beneficial. Public bathhouses existed in many towns, and they were popular gathering places where people could socialize while soaking in communal tubs. But these bathhouses quickly gained reputations as places where more than just washing took place. They became associated with prostitution, gambling, and various forms of medieval debauchery. The church, never one to miss an opportunity to condemn something enjoyable, began preaching against the moral dangers of public bathing. More importantly, medieval medical theory held that bathing could actually be dangerous to your health. According to the prevailing wisdom of the time, hot water and soap opened your pores, making you more vulnerable to disease. The protective layer of dirt and oils on your skin was seen as a natural barrier against illness. This wasn't entirely wrong, actually. In a world without understanding of germs or proper sanitation, the water used for bathing was often contaminated with the same bacteria and parasites that caused illness. A dirty person who avoided contaminated water might actually be healthier than a clean person who regularly exposed themselves to waterborne diseases. So bathing became a rare occurrence reserved for special occasions like weddings, religious festivals, or when you were so filthy that even medieval standards found you offensive. And even then, it was often a communal affair with multiple people sharing the same bath water. When you did bathe, the process was elaborate and time-consuming. Water had to be heated over a fire one bucket at a time. A wooden tub was filled with the warm water and you'd climb in for a quick wash. Soap, if available, was harsh and made from animal fat and wood ash. It was effective at removing dirt, but equally effective at removing skin, leaving you red and raw. The water quickly became murky with dirt and dead skin cells. If you were bathing with others, you might be the fourth or fifth person to use the same water. By the time it was your turn, you were essentially bathing in a soup of other people's filth. After your brief soak, you'd dry off with a rough cloth and put on the same dirty clothes you'd been wearing before. Within hours, you'd smell just as bad as you had before the bath, leading many people to conclude that bathing was a waste of time and effort. If you thought medieval bathing was bad, wait until you hear about dental hygiene, or rather the complete absence of dental hygiene. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, and no floss. The concept of preventive dental care is as foreign as the idea of space travel. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse their mouth with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are left to fend for themselves, and they're not doing well. By your mid-20s, your mouth looks like a medieval battlefield. Your teeth are stained brown and black from years of neglect, and several are chipped or broken from chewing on hard bread and tough meat. Cavities are so common that they're considered a normal part of aging, and your gums are swollen and bleeding from constant infection. The medieval diet doesn't help matters. While sugar isn't yet widely available, the food you eat is often coarse and acidic. Bread is made from roughly ground grain that acts like sandpaper on your teeth. Ale and wine are consumed regularly, bathing your mouth in acids that eat away at your enamel. And the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables means you're not getting the nutrients your teeth and gums need to stay healthy. Toothaches are a constant companion, ranging from a dull ache to sharp stabbing pains that make you want to claw at your face. You learn to chew on one side of your mouth to avoid the worst of the pain, but eventually, every tooth becomes sensitive. When the pain becomes unbearable, you have limited options. You can visit a barber surgeon who might attempt to pull the offending tooth with a pair of pliers and no anesthesia. The procedure is excruciatingly painful, and there's a good chance the barber will break the tooth or damage your jaw in the process. Or you can try home remedies, chewing on willow bark for its pain-relieving properties, applying crushed herbs to the affected area, or even burning the tooth with a hot iron in the hope of killing the nerve. None of these methods are particularly effective, and some can make the problem worse. Infected teeth are especially dangerous. Without antibiotics, a simple abscess can quickly spread throughout your body, causing fever, swelling, and even death. Many people die from dental infections that would be easily treatable with modern medicine. The social implications of bad teeth are also significant. In a world where physical appearance can determine your social status and marriage prospects, a mouth full of rotten teeth is a serious handicap. People learn to smile with their lips closed, and conversations are often conducted at a distance to avoid offending others with bad breath. Bad breath or halitosis is so common that it's barely remarked upon. Everyone has it from the lowliest peasant to the highest nobleman. It's a combination of rotting teeth, poor digestion, and the general lack of oral hygiene that creates a smell that could probably be used to clear a room. Speaking of smells, let's talk about the overall aromatic landscape of medieval life. In a world without deodorant, perfume, or regular bathing body odor is not just common, it's universal and potent. You wake up each morning with the accumulated sense of sleep, stale sweat, morning breath, and the various odors that bodies produce during the night. But instead of washing these smells away, you simply add to them throughout the day. Your unwashed clothes trap and concentrate these odors, creating a personal cloud of aromatic intensity that follows you wherever you go. The wool fabric of your tunic absorbs sweat and oils, and without regular washing, these substances build up over time, creating new and interesting combinations of smells. But you're not alone in this aromatic journey. Everyone around you smells just as bad, if not worse. The blacksmith reeks of coal smoke and hot metal. The baker smells of yeast and flour, but also of the sweat that comes from working near a hot oven all day. The farmer carries the scents of animals' manure and earth. In crowded spaces like markets, churches, or taverns, the combined effect of dozens of unwashed bodies creates an olfactory experience that would probably make a modern person faint. The air becomes thick and heavy with the mingled sense of humanity, and you learn to breathe through your mouth to avoid the worst of it. Interestingly, people develop a kind of olfactory tolerance. When everyone smells bad, no one's smell is particularly offensive. You become nose blind to your own odor and to the odors of those around you. It's only when someone has been sick or when they've been working with particularly pungent materials that their smell becomes noticeable. This creates a strange social dynamic where personal hygiene is almost irrelevant. Since everyone smells bad, there's no social pressure to smell good. In fact, someone who smells too clean might be viewed with suspicion. What are they trying to hide? Why are they wasting time and resources on unnecessary bathing? But here's where medieval life gets interesting from a scientific perspective. While the lack of hygiene might seem uniformly bad, it actually created some unexpected benefits and developed some ingenious adaptations. Your unwashed clothes, for example, weren't just repositories of bad smells, they were also practical survival tools. The layers of dirt, sweat, and oils that built up on your clothing actually helped to waterproof the fabric. A tunic that had been worn for months without washing would repel light rain much better than a freshly cleaned garment. The grime also filled in the gaps between the fibers of the cloth, making your clothes more wind-resistant and warmer. In a world without central heating, this extra insulation could mean the difference between surviving the winter and freezing to death. Your unwashed skin also developed its own protective qualities. The natural oils and beneficial bacteria on your skin created a barrier against harmful microorganisms. While this wasn't as effective as modern soap and sanitizer, it did provide some protection against skin infections and irritations. Medieval people also developed practical solutions to their hygiene challenges. Since they couldn't wash their clothes frequently, they learned to layer their clothing strategically. A linen undergarment, even if it was rarely washed, would absorb sweat and oils before they reached the more expensive outer garments. This linen could be washed more easily than wool, and it dried faster. They also used aromatic herbs and flowers to mask bad smells. Lavender, rosemary, and other fragrant plants were tucked into clothing or scattered on floors to provide a more pleasant scent. While this didn't eliminate body odor, it did create a more complex and less offensive aromatic environment. People learn to read smells as sources of information. The scent of someone's breath could indicate what they had eaten, whether they were healthy or sick, and even their social status. Certain trades had distinctive smells that could be identified from a distance. A person's overall scent told a story about their life, their work, and their health. Now that you've navigated the hazardous waters of medieval morning hygiene, it's time to begin your working day. And like everything else in medieval life, work is going to be a dirty, smelly, and uncomfortable affair. If you're a peasant, which statistically you almost certainly are, your work involves farming. And farming in medieval times means getting intimately acquainted with dirt, mud, animal waste, and every other substance that the earth can produce. You grab your tools, a wooden hoe with a metal blade if you're lucky, a sickle for cutting grain, and perhaps a wooden plow if you're working with oxen. These tools are crude by modern standards, but they're all you have and they're precious. A broken tool could mean the difference between a successful harvest and starvation. Your work begins before dawn and continues until sunset. There are no coffee breaks, no lunch hours, and no weekends. You work 6 days a week, and even on Sunday, the day of rest, you might find yourself tending to animals or handling urgent tasks that can't wait. The physical demands of medieval farm work are brutal. You're constantly bending, lifting, and carrying. Your back aches from hunching over crops. Your hands become cracked and bleeding from handling rough tools and thorny plants. Your feet, whether bare or in minimal shoes, are constantly exposed to sharp stones, thorns, and the inevitable animal droppings that litter the fields. And speaking of animal droppings, you're going to be dealing with a lot of them. Manure is crucial for fertilizing crops, and as a peasant, you're responsible for collecting it, spreading it, and working it into the soil. This means spending hours knee-deep in animal waste with the smell permeating your clothes and skin. The work is also seasonal, which means your level of filthiness varies throughout the year. During planting season, you're covered in mud and seeds. During harvest time, you're coated in dust and grain chaff. In winter, you're dealing with animal care, which means even more manure and the added challenge of working in cold, wet conditions. Let's talk about texture, because in medieval times, everything feels rough, scratchy, and unpleasant against your skin. Your clothes are made from wool that's been poorly processed and roughly woven. The fabric is thick and coarse with fibers that poke and scratch with every movement. There's no softening fabric conditioner, no gentle cycle, and no concern for comfort. Clothes are meant to be functional, not pleasant to wear. Your skin becomes accustomed to this constant irritation, developing a tough, leathery quality that can handle the abuse. But you're also constantly dealing with rashes, chafing, and raw spots where the fabric rubs against your skin. The tools you use are equally rough. Wooden handles are splinter-prone and wear smooth in some places while remaining jagged in others. Metal tools are often pitted and rough, leaving your hands covered in small cuts and scrapes. Even simple tasks like eating involve rough wooden bowls and crude utensils that feel harsh against your lips and tongue. Your living environment is no better. The floors are hard-packed dirt or rough stone. The walls are made from wattle and daub, a mixture of wood, clay, and straw that's constantly shedding particles. Your bed is a collection of rough materials that poke and prod you throughout the night. Even the food you eat has a rougher texture than what you might be used to. Bread is made from coarsely ground grain that includes bits of husks and sometimes even small stones from the grinding process. Meat is tough and chewy, often preserved with salt that creates a jerky-like texture. Vegetables are often woody and fibrous, especially later in the season when they've been stored in root cellars. This constant exposure to rough textures toughens your skin and makes you more resilient to physical discomfort. Your hands develop thick calluses that can handle tasks that would leave modern hands bleeding. Your feet become so tough that you can walk on sharp stones without flinching. But it also means that you're constantly dealing with low-level physical discomfort. Your skin is always slightly irritated, your mouth is always a bit sore from rough food, and your entire body is accustomed to being in a state of mild physical distress. Here's something interesting about medieval hygiene. It wasn't just about ignorance or laziness, it was largely about economics. Being clean was expensive, and most people simply couldn't afford it. Let's start with soap. In medieval times, soap was a luxury item that required significant resources to produce. It was made from animal fats and wood ash processed through a complex chemical reaction that required skill and time. The resulting soap was harsh and not particularly pleasant to use, but it was effective at removing dirt and oils. But here's the problem. Soap was expensive. For a peasant family living on the edge of survival, spending money on soap meant not spending it on food tools or other necessities. You had to make a choice between being clean and being fed, and for most people the choice was obvious. Hot water was also expensive in terms of time and fuel. Heating water required burning wood or charcoal, both of which were precious resources. Wood needed to be chopped, dried, and stored. Charcoal needed to be purchased or produced. The time spent heating water for a bath was time that could be spent working farming or doing other essential tasks. Clean clothes were perhaps the most expensive luxury of all. Having multiple sets of clothing meant having enough money to buy extra fabric, which was costly. It also meant having enough time to spin thread weave cloth and sew garments, or having enough money to pay someone else to do these tasks. For most people, owning more than one set of clothes was simply impossible. You had one tunic, one pair of hose, and perhaps a cloak for cold weather. These items had to last for years, and washing them frequently would wear them out more quickly. The wealthy, of course, could afford to be cleaner. They had servants to heat water, multiple sets of clothing, and access to luxury items like soap and perfume. But even among the wealthy, frequent bathing was not common, and personal hygiene was still far below modern standards. This economic reality created a clear class distinction based on cleanliness. The wealthy might smell bad by modern standards, but they smelled significantly better than the poor. A person's scent could immediately indicate their social status, making cleanliness a form of social currency. Your level of cleanliness in medieval times follows a predictable seasonal pattern, with each time of year bringing its own unique challenges and opportunities for acquiring new layers of grime. Spring arrives with the promise of warmer weather and new growth, but it also brings mud, lots and lots of mud. The winter snows melt, turning every road path and field into a boggy mess. Your feet disappear into the muck with every step, and your clothes become splattered with mud that ranges from brown to black to an indefinable color that might charitably be called medieval gray. The spring rains continue the muddy theme, turning your dirt floors into slippery, treacherous surfaces. Water drips through your thatched roof, creating puddles that attract insects and develop their own ecosystem of mold and bacteria. Your clothes never fully dry, maintaining a permanent state of dampness that makes them smell like wet wool mixed with barnyard animals. This is also the season when you're working most closely with animals. Sheep are sheared, releasing clouds of lanolin and sheep-scented dust. Pigs are moved to new areas, tracking mud and manure everywhere they go. Cattle are bred and calved, creating additional opportunities for you to become intimately acquainted with various animal fluids. Summer brings relief from the cold and wet, but it introduces new challenges. The heat makes your unwashed clothes feel like woolen furnaces, trapping sweat and intensifying all the accumulated odors of the past months. You sweat constantly, but there's no escape from the heat except in the evening when the sun finally sets. The summer work is dusty and dirty. You're harvesting grain, which covers you in a fine layer of chaff and dust that gets into every pore and crevice. The dust mixes with your sweat to create a paste-like substance that clings to your skin and stains your clothes. Your hair becomes stiff with accumulated dust and sweat, and your scalp itches constantly. Insects are also at their peak during summer. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs thrive in the warm weather, and their populations explode. You're constantly scratching, creating small wounds that attract more insects and sometimes become infected. Mosquitoes and flies swarm around you, attracted by your scent and the various substances that have accumulated on your clothes. Autumn is harvest time, which means you're working harder than ever. You're covered in grain dust, fruit juices, and the dirt from digging root vegetables. Your hands are stained purple from grapes, brown from nuts, and black from handling various preservation processes. This is also the season when you're preparing for winter, which means slaughtering animals and preserving meat. You're up to your elbows in blood fat and various animal parts. The work is messy and smelly, and the substances you're dealing with have a tendency to stain clothes and skin in ways that will last for months. Winter brings its own unique challenges. The cold makes washing even more unappealing than usual, and the scarcity of fuel means that hot water is a rare luxury. You're wearing more clothes than ever, layering everything you own to stay warm. These layers trap heat, but they also trap odors and moisture, creating a personal microclimate that's both cozy and suffocating. The winter work is often indoor work, which means you're dealing with smoke from cooking fires, the smell of preserved foods, and the close quarters of sharing your living space with both family and animals. Many people brought their most valuable animals inside during the winter, so you might be sharing your home with a pig, some chickens, or even a cow. When you do finally decide to wash your clothes, perhaps once or twice a year, it's an event that requires planning, preparation, and no small amount of courage. The process begins with gathering the necessary supplies. You need a large quantity of water, which means multiple trips to the well or stream. You need fuel to heat the water, which means chopping wood or using precious charcoal. You need soap or lye, which you might make yourself from wood ash and animal fat, or purchase at considerable expense. You also need a place to do the washing. This might be a stream or river where you can use the flowing water to help with rinsing, or it might be a large tub or basin filled with heated water and placed in your yard or kitchen. The actual washing process is physically demanding. You have to scrub each garment vigorously against a wooden board, using your knuckles and a harsh soap to work out months of accumulated dirt and oils. The water quickly becomes murky and foul-smelling as the grime is released from the fabric. Your hands become raw and cracked from the harsh soap and the constant scrubbing. The lye burns your skin, leaving it red and irritated. The hot water scalds your hands, but you have to keep working to get the clothes clean. After scrubbing, you have to rinse the clothes thoroughly to remove the soap. This requires multiple changes of water, each one requiring more fuel to heat and more time to prepare. You wring out each garment by hand, twisting and squeezing to remove as much water as possible. Finally, you have to dry the clothes. In good weather, you can hang them outside on bushes or rough clotheslines. But in winter or during rainy periods, you have to dry them inside, which means your already cramped living space becomes even more crowded with damp, steaming garments. The entire process can take an entire day, and at the end of it, your clothes are clean but stiff and scratchy. The harsh soap and vigorous scrubbing have roughened the fabric, making it less comfortable to wear. Within days, your clothes will be dirty again, and the cycle of accumulated grime will begin anew. It's no wonder that most people chose to wash their clothes as infrequently as possible. The amount of work involved, combined with the cost of supplies and fuel made clean clothes a luxury that few could afford on a regular basis. One of the most striking aspects of medieval hygiene is how communal it was. In a world where privacy was rare and personal space was non existent, everyone's hygiene habits or lack thereof became a shared experience. Your family sleeps together in one room, sometimes in one bed. You eat together, work together, and live in close quarters where every smell, every sound, and every bodily function is shared. This creates a strange intimacy based on mutual acceptance of each other's uncleanliness. When your father returns from a day of working in the fields covered in mud and manure, no one comments on his appearance or smell. When your mother spends the day cooking over a smoky fire, emerging covered in soot and sweat, it's simply accepted as part of life. When your siblings scratch their flea bites or pick at their lice, it's no more remarkable than breathing. This communal tolerance extends beyond the family to the broader community. In the market square, dozens of unwashed people gather to buy and sell goods. The combined smell is overwhelming, but it's also universal. Everyone contributes to the aromatic atmosphere, and everyone accepts it as normal. Church services are particularly interesting from a hygiene perspective. The entire community gathers in a closed space for hours at a time. The smell of dozens of unwashed bodies, combined with the smoke from candles and incense, creates an atmosphere that's both spiritual and suffocating. But for medieval people, this is simply what community gathering smells like. Public houses and taverns develop their own distinctive scents. The combination of unwashed patrons, spilled ale smoke from the fireplace, and food creates a complex, aromatic environment that regulars learn to associate with comfort and social interaction. The smell becomes part of the establishment's identity. Even intimate relationships develop within this context of shared uncleanliness. Couples court, marry, and live together without the benefit of modern hygiene. Physical attraction and romantic love exist despite, or perhaps because of, the universal acceptance of body odor and imperfect cleanliness. While everyone in medieval society was dirty by modern standards, there were definitely gradations of filthiness that reflected social status and economic resources. At the bottom of the hierarchy were the truly destitute beggars, vagrants, and those who had lost their homes and means of support. These people had no access to clean water, no changes of clothing, and no opportunities for even basic hygiene. They lived in ditches under bridges or in abandoned buildings, and their appearance reflected their desperate circumstances. Peasants and laborers were the next level up. They had homes, however humble, and access to water from wells or streams. They might own one or two changes of clothing, though these were rarely washed. Their work kept them dirty, but they had some means of maintaining basic cleanliness when absolutely necessary. Craftsmen and merchants had more resources and could afford slightly better hygiene. They might have access to soap, multiple sets of clothing, and the time to wash occasionally. Their work was often less physically demanding and dirty than farm labor, allowing them to maintain a somewhat cleaner appearance. The wealthy nobles, successful merchants, and clergy had the best access to hygiene resources. They could afford servants to heat water and assist with bathing. They owned multiple sets of clothing and could have garments washed more frequently. They had access to luxury items like perfume, fine soaps, and soft linens. But even among the wealthy, standards of cleanliness were far below what we would consider acceptable today. A wealthy lord might bathe once a month and change his clothes weekly, which would have been considered exceptionally clean by medieval standards. The clergy occupied an interesting position in the hygiene hierarchy. Some religious orders emphasize cleanliness as a form of spiritual discipline, requiring members to wash regularly and maintain clean clothing. Others viewed physical discomfort, including the discomfort of being dirty, as a form of spiritual penance. These monks and nuns deliberately avoided bathing and wore hair shirts designed to irritate the skin, believing that physical suffering brought them closer to God. This created visible markers of social status that could be read from across a room. A person's level of cleanliness immediately communicated their position in society, their access to resources, and their social connections. When special occasions did call for cleaning, the process became an elaborate ritual that involved the entire household and sometimes the broader community. Wedding preparations were one of the few times when extensive cleaning was considered necessary. The bride would undergo a special cleansing process, often involving female relatives who would help heat water, prepare herbal baths, and assist with washing hair that might not have been properly cleaned in months. This pre-wedding bath was both practical and symbolic. Practically, it ensured that the bride would be as clean as possible for her wedding day. Symbolically, it represented a transition from her old life to her new one, washing away her past and preparing her for her role as a wife. The groom would also undergo some form of cleaning, though usually less elaborate than the bride's preparations. He might visit a barber for a shave and haircut, and perhaps take a quick bath if facilities were available. Religious festivals also sometimes called for special cleaning. Before major holy days like Easter, some people would make an effort to wash themselves and their clothes as a form of spiritual preparation. This wasn't universal, but it was common enough that churches sometimes had to provide facilities for the faithful to clean themselves before entering. Illness often necessitated cleaning, though not in the way you might expect. Medieval medical theory held that certain diseases were caused by corrupted humors that could be expelled through sweating. This led to treatments that involved heating the patient and inducing sweating, followed by washing to remove the corrupt substances from the skin. Birth and death also involved cleaning rituals. New mothers were often given special baths after childbirth, both to clean them physically and to purify them spiritually. The dead were washed and prepared for burial, ensuring that they entered the afterlife in as clean a state as possible. These cleaning rituals were community events that reinforced social bonds and shared values. Neighbors and relatives would gather to help with the preparations, sharing resources and labor. The person being cleaned would be the center of attention, receiving care and assistance that emphasized their importance to the community. Despite the general lack of hygiene, medieval people did have their own concepts of beauty and attractiveness, and they developed an industry around enhancing appearance within the constraints of their time. Perfumes and scented oils were among the most important beauty products. Made from flowers, herbs, and spices, these products were designed to mask body odor rather than eliminate it. Wealthy women would apply rosewater lavender oil or more exotic scents imported from distant lands. Men also used scented products, though usually more sparingly. A merchant might apply a small amount of scented oil to his beard, or a nobleman might carry a pomander, a small ball filled with aromatic substances to ward off unpleasant smells. Hair care was another important aspect of medieval beauty. Since washing hair was difficult and time-consuming, people developed other methods of maintaining their appearance. Hair was brushed regularly to remove dirt and parasites, and herbal treatments were applied to add shine and scent. Women often covered their hair with elaborate headdresses that served both fashion and hygiene purposes. These coverings protected hair from dirt and helped contain any unpleasant odors. They also allowed women to go longer between hair washings while still maintaining a respectable appearance. Cosmetics were used to enhance facial features and disguise the effects of poor hygiene. Lead-based powders were applied to create pale complexions, though these were often toxic and caused more problems than they solved. Rouge made from various substances was used to add color to cheeks and lips. Dental care, while primitive, did exist in some forms. Wealthy people might use tooth powders made from abrasive substances to scrub their teeth. Some people chewed on aromatic herbs to freshen their breath, though this was more about masking bad smells than preventing dental problems. Clothing was perhaps the most important aspect of medieval beauty and hygiene. While clothes couldn't be washed frequently, they could be adorned with jewelry, embroidery, and other decorative elements that drew attention away from their cleanliness issues. Wealthy people would layer multiple garments to create complex, impressive outfits that demonstrated their status and resources. These layers also helped trap and contain body odors, creating a more pleasant, aromatic environment for those around them. Medieval medical theory had a complex relationship with hygiene that was based on fundamentally different understandings of health and disease than we have today. The prevailing medical theory was based on the four humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, illness was caused by imbalances in these humors, and treatment involved restoring the proper balance through various means. Bathing was viewed with suspicion because it was believed to open the pores and allow disease to enter the body. The natural oils and dirt on the skin were seen as protective barriers that should not be removed too frequently. This wasn't entirely wrong. In a world without understanding of germs, the water used for bathing was often contaminated and could indeed cause illness. However, medieval medicine did recognize that certain types of cleanliness could be beneficial. Washing hands before eating was sometimes recommended, though not for the reasons we understand today. Medieval doctors believed that clean hands helped maintain the proper balance of humors during digestion. Dental problems were understood to be connected to overall health, though the mechanisms were misunderstood. Bad teeth were believed to corrupt the humors and cause illness throughout the body. This led to treatments that involved removing diseased teeth, though the procedures were primitive and dangerous. Skin conditions were common and were treated with various herbal remedies and topical applications. Some of these treatments were actually effective, while others were harmful or useless. The important thing was that medieval people recognized that skin health was important and developed treatments based on their understanding of medicine. Mental health was also believed to be connected to physical cleanliness. People who were extremely dirty or unkempt were sometimes thought to be suffering from melancholia or other mental disturbances. This led to treatments that involved cleaning and grooming as forms of therapy. Plague and other epidemic diseases created special hygiene challenges. During outbreaks, people often avoided bathing even more than usual, believing that open pores made them more susceptible to disease. They also burned aromatic substances to purify the air and wore amulets and charms for protection. Ironically, some of the hygiene practices that were avoided for medical reasons might actually have been beneficial. Regular bathing, if done with clean water, could have helped prevent the spread of disease. But in a world where clean water was rare and medical understanding was limited, the safest course often seemed to be avoiding washing altogether. Let's talk about your constant companions in medieval life, the vast army of parasites, insects, and small creatures that have decided to make your body their permanent home. You wake up scratching and you'll go to bed scratching. In between, you'll scratch some more. This isn't occasional discomfort. This is a constant, relentless battle between you and creatures so small you can barely see them, but so numerous that they essentially control your daily experience. Fleas are your most numerous adversaries. They live in your straw mattress, in your clothes, in your hair, and they reproduce at a rate that would make rabbits jealous. Female fleas can lay up to 50 eggs per day, and these eggs fall off your body and into your bedding, your clothes, and every surface you touch. Within weeks, a small flea problem becomes a full-scale infestation. The bites are maddening. Small red, intensely itchy bumps appear all over your body, concentrated around your ankles, waist, and any area where your clothes fit tightly. You scratch until you bleed, which only creates more opportunities for infection. The scratching becomes so automatic that you do it without thinking, like a nervous tick that never goes away. Lice are even more personal invaders. They live in your hair and in the seams of your clothing, feeding on your blood and leaving behind eggs, nits that stick to your hair, shafts like tiny pearls. Head lice make your scalp itch constantly, and you develop the habit of running your fingers through your hair trying to catch and crush the tiny insects. Body lice live in your clothes and come onto your skin only to feed. They're larger than head lice and easier to see, but they're also more numerous. When you undress on those rare occasions when you do, you can actually see them crawling around on the fabric of your clothes. Bed bugs are the nighttime specialists. They hide in the cracks and crevices of your bed frame during the day and emerge at night to feed on your blood while you sleep. You wake up with lines of bites, usually 3 or 4 in a row, earning them the nickname breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The smell of a bedbug infestation is distinctive, a sweet, musty odor that permeates your sleeping area. When you crush one accidentally during the night, it releases a smell that's been compared to rotting raspberries mixed with almonds. But the insects are just part of your parasite problem. You're also dealing with various types of worms and internal parasites that you acquire from contaminated food and water. These cause digestive problems, weakness, and sometimes visible signs like bloated bellies or unusual paleness. Scabies mites burrow under your skin, creating tiny tunnels that itch intensely and often become infected from scratching. The mites are too small to see, but their effects are unmistakable, small raised bumps that appear in lines across your skin, usually between your fingers around your wrists and in other warm, moist areas. When all this itching, biting, and general discomfort becomes unbearable, you turn to medieval medicine for relief. Unfortunately, medieval medicine is about as effective as trying to cure a headache by hitting yourself with a hammer. The local healer, who might be a barber surgeon, a wise woman, or someone who just claims to know about herbs, has a limited arsenal of treatments. Most of these treatments are based on the theory of the 4 humors and are designed to restore balance to your body rather than address the actual cause of your problems. For your flea and lice problem, you might be given a mixture of mercury and lard to rub into your scalp. Mercury is toxic, and the treatment is likely to poison you slowly while providing minimal relief from the parasites. But it's what's available, and desperation makes people willing to try anything. Herbal remedies are more common and sometimes more effective. Pennyroyal tansy and other strong-smelling herbs are believed to repel insects. You might be told to stuff these herbs into your mattress or sew them into small pouches to wear around your neck. Some of these herbal treatments actually work to some degree. Certain plants do have insect-repelling properties, and the strong smells can mask your natural scent, making you less attractive to parasites. But the effects are temporary and minimal compared to modern treatments. For internal parasites, the standard treatment is purging, using strong laxatives to empty your digestive system in the hope of expelling the worms. This is unpleasant, weakening, and not particularly effective, but it's better than doing nothing. Bloodletting is prescribed for almost everything, including parasite problems. The theory is that removing some of your blood will restore the proper balance of humors and cure whatever ails you. In practice, bloodletting weakens you and makes you more susceptible to illness, but medieval medical theory insists that it's beneficial. If you're wealthy enough, you might be able to afford more exotic treatments. Imported spices and herbs are believed to have special healing properties. Theriac, A complex mixture of dozens of ingredients, including viper's flesh, is considered a cure-all, though it's expensive and probably useless. Prayer and religious rituals are also important parts of medieval medicine. Your ailments are believed to be connected to your spiritual state, so treating your soul is considered as important as treating your body. You might be required to make pilgrimages, give donations to the church, or perform penance to cure your parasites. In a world where everyone is constantly itchy, scratching becomes a social activity with its own etiquette and customs. There are polite ways to scratch and impolite ways to scratch. Discreet scratching using your fingernails to gently address an itch while appearing to adjust your clothing is acceptable in most social situations. Vigorous scratching that draws attention to yourself is considered poor manners. Scratching in church is particularly challenging. You're required to sit still and pay attention to the service, but your flea bites are driving you crazy. You develop techniques for scratching without being obvious about it, rubbing against the wooden pew, pressing your back against the wall, or using the distraction of standing and kneeling to address the worst itches. In social gatherings, people often help each other with scratching. Friends and family members will scratch each other's backs, help remove lice from hair, and assist with reaching difficult spots. This mutual grooming becomes a form of intimacy and social bonding. Children are taught early how to manage their parasite problems. They learn to search through each other's hair for lice, to help check each other for flea bites, and to assist with applying herbal treatments. These activities become part of daily family life as routine as eating or sleeping. Market days are particularly challenging because you're in close contact with many other people, all of whom have their own parasite populations. The crowded conditions allow for easy transfer of fleas and lice between people, so you often return home from market day with new varieties of pests. Travelers face special challenges because they're exposed to different regional populations of parasites. A merchant traveling from town to town might acquire new types of fleas or lice that his body isn't accustomed to, leading to more severe reactions and increased discomfort. Your parasite problems follow predictable seasonal patterns that add variety to your year-round discomfort. Spring brings warming weather that increases insect activity. Your flea population, which may have been somewhat dormant during the winter, suddenly explodes as the temperature rises. The eggs that have been lying dormant in your bedding and clothing begin to hatch, creating a new generation of hungry parasites. This is also the season when you begin working outdoors, more exposing yourself to new varieties of biting insects. Mosquitoes emerge from their winter hiding places, adding a new element to your daily misery. Unlike your familiar fleas and lice, mosquitoes come and go, creating sudden, intense itching that gradually fades, only to be renewed with each new bite. Summer is peak parasite season. The warm weather is perfect for insect reproduction, and your unwashed clothes provide ideal breeding conditions. You're also sweating more, which makes you more attractive to biting insects. The combination of increased parasite activity and summer work conditions makes this the most uncomfortable time of year. Heat rash adds to your misery. The combination of rough clothing, constant sweating, and inability to wash regularly creates inflamed, itchy patches of skin that are separate from, but combine with your insect bite problems. You're itchy everywhere all the time for multiple reasons. Autumn brings some relief as cooling temperatures slow insect reproduction, but it also brings new challenges. You're working harder during harvest season, which increases sweating and creates new opportunities for skin irritation. You're also handling various plants and crops that may cause allergic reactions or skin irritation. Winter offers the most relief from biting insects, but it creates its own skin problems. The cold, dry air cracks your skin, especially on your hands and face. The constant wearing of heavy, rough clothing creates new areas of chafing and irritation. And the close quarters of winter living, when you might be sharing your home with animals, create new opportunities for parasite transmission. Your constant battle with parasites isn't just a personal health issue, it's an economic problem that affects your ability to work and earn a living. The time you spend dealing with parasites is time you can't spend on productive work. Searching through hair for lice, applying herbal treatments, and dealing with infected bite wounds all take time that could be used for farming, crafting, or other income-generating activities. Severe parasite infestations can make you too sick to work effectively. Anemia from flea and lice bites, infections from scratched wounds, and digestive problems from internal parasites all reduce your physical capacity and endurance. The cost of treatments, however ineffective they might be, represents a significant expense for a family living at subsistence level. Herbal remedies, visits to healers, and imported medicines all cost money that could be spent on food or other necessities. Parasite problems also affect your social and economic relationships. Severe infestations make you less desirable as a worker, a business partner, or a marriage prospect. In extreme cases, people with obvious parasite problems might be excluded from certain social or economic activities. The need to replace clothing damaged by parasite treatments or by excessive scratching represents another economic burden. Clothes treated with mercury or other harsh substances might deteriorate more quickly, requiring more frequent replacement. Lost sleep due to nighttime itching affects your ability to work effectively during the day. Tired, distracted workers are less productive and more prone to accidents, which can result in injury, lost work time, and additional medical expenses. Living with constant physical discomfort has profound psychological effects that shape your personality, your relationships, and your worldview. The never-ending cycle of itching and scratching creates a constant low-level stress that affects your mood and behavior. You become irritable more easily, have difficulty concentrating, and find it hard to relax completely. The physical discomfort becomes a mental burden that colors every aspect of your daily experience. Sleep deprivation from nighttime itching affects your mental clarity and emotional stability. You're tired all the time, which makes you more susceptible to illness and less able to cope with the other challenges of medieval life. The social aspects of parasite problems create feelings of shame and self-consciousness. Even though everyone has parasites, severe infestations can be socially embarrassing and can affect your standing in the community. You develop a kind of stoicism about physical discomfort that extends beyond your parasite problems. When you're constantly dealing with itching, biting, and skin irritation, other forms of physical discomfort seem more manageable by comparison. This creates a high tolerance for pain and discomfort that serves you well in other aspects of medieval life. The communal nature of parasite problems also creates social bonds. Shared suffering brings people together, and the mutual assistance required to deal with parasite problems strengthens family and community relationships. Children who grow up with constant parasite problems develop different expectations about comfort and physical well-being than modern children. They learn to accept discomfort as a normal part of life and develop coping strategies that help them function despite their physical challenges. The constant battle with parasites also affects your relationship with your own body. You become hyper-aware of every itch, every bite, every skin irritation. Your body becomes as much an adversary as a vessel, something to be managed and controlled rather than enjoyed. Now we come to one of the most fundamental and universally challenging aspects of medieval life, answering the call of nature. In an era without indoor plumbing, toilet paper, or even basic privacy, this most basic human need becomes a complex negotiation between necessity, social convention, and simple survival. Your morning begins, as it does every morning, with urgent biological needs that cannot be ignored. But unlike the simple convenience of walking to a nearby bathroom, your medieval reality presents you with a series of increasingly unpleasant options. If you live in a town, you might have access to a communal latrine, a long wooden structure built over a deep pit with multiple holes cut side by side. The smell hits you long before you reach the building, a concentrated essence of human waste that's been accumulating for months or even years. The pit below is a writhing ecosystem of maggots, flies, and decomposing matter that creates its own weather system of noxious gases. You enter the structure and find yourself seated shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, all engaged in the same basic biological function. Privacy is not just absent, it's an alien concept. Conversation is common as people discuss the weather, local gossip, or business matters while relieving themselves. You learn to conduct social interactions in circumstance that would horrify modern sensibilities. The wooden seats are worn smooth by countless users, but they're also stained splintery and occasionally occupied by spiders or other creatures that have found the environment to their liking. You sit gingerly, trying to find a position that's both functional and minimally disgusting. If you're in a rural area, your options are even more primitive. You might have a wooden bucket, a chamber pot that sits in or near your home. This bucket serves your entire family and is emptied when it becomes too full to use, which might be daily or might be weekly, depending on your tolerance for accumulating waste. The smell of a full chamber pot is indescribable. It permeates your living space, clings to your clothes, and becomes part of the aromatic landscape of your daily life. You learn to breathe through your mouth when using it, and you try to position it as far from your sleeping area as the confines of your small home allow. Once you've completed the basic biological function, you face the challenge of cleaning yourself, a process that requires creativity, resourcefulness, and a strong stomach. Toilet paper doesn't exist. The concept of soft, absorbent paper, designed specifically for personal hygiene, is still centuries in the future. Instead, you must make do with whatever materials are available, practical and affordable. Straw is one of the most common options. If you can find straw that's relatively clean and not too coarse, it serves as an adequate, if uncomfortable, cleaning material. But straw is often dirty, may contain insects or parasites, and has a tendency to break apart during use, leaving pieces behind that create their own hygiene challenges. Leaves are another option, but they require careful selection. Some leaves are toxic and can cause severe skin irritation. Others are too small, too slippery, or too rough to be effective. You learn to identify the best leaves for the purpose, typically large, soft ones that grow in clean areas away from animal waste and contamination. Moss is highly prized when available. It's soft, absorbent, and naturally antimicrobial. But moss grows in specific conditions and isn't always accessible, especially during winter months when it might be frozen or covered with snow. Smooth stones are used by some people, though this requires careful selection and preparation. The stones must be the right size and shape with no sharp edges that could cause injury. They can be reused, but they require washing, which brings us back to the fundamental problem of water scarcity and the difficulty of cleaning anything in medieval times. Cloth rags are the luxury option. If you have spare fabric, which most people don't, you can tear it into small pieces for personal hygiene use. These rags can theoretically be washed and reused, but the washing process is so labor-intensive that many people simply discard them after use. Some people use nothing at all. They simply learn to live with less than perfect cleanliness, accepting it as one of the many discomforts of medieval life. This isn't as shocking as it might seem to modern sensibilities, considering that everyone around them is dealing with the same limitations. After you've completed your business and attempted to clean yourself, you face the monumental challenge of waste disposal. In a world without sewage systems, garbage collection, or environmental regulations, human waste becomes everyone's problem. If you're using a chamber pot disposal, means carrying it outside and dumping it somewhere. The question is where? In towns, the answer is often into the street. You open your door or window and pour the contents of your chamber pot into the muddy, garbage-strewn lane that passes for a street. This practice is so common that there are established customs around it. You're supposed to shout a warning, "Gardy Lou," in some areas to alert passersby that waste is about to rain down from above. But people don't always remember to shout, and even when they do, there's often nowhere for pedestrians to take cover. The streets become open sewers flowing with a mixture of human waste, animal droppings, kitchen scraps, and rainwater. The smell is overwhelming and the health hazards are enormous. Diseases spread rapidly through these contaminated waterways, and epidemics can wipe out significant portions of the population. In rural areas, waste disposal often means walking to the edge of your property and dumping your chamber pot in a designated area. This might be a ditch, a corner of a field, or simply a spot far enough from your water source to avoid immediate contamination. But far enough is a relative concept in medieval times. People don't understand the connection between waste disposal and water contamination. So wells and streams often become polluted with human waste, creating cycles of disease and illness that affect entire communities. Some households attempt to compost human waste along with other organic materials, using it as fertilizer for gardens and crops. This practice can be effective if done properly, but medieval people lacked the knowledge to compost safely. Improperly composted human waste can contaminate food crops and spread disease. For those wealthy enough to afford them, more sophisticated waste disposal systems exist, though sophisticated is a relative term when applied to medieval technology. Castles and manor houses often feature guardrobes, small chambers built into the walls of the structure with chutes that carry waste directly outside. These chutes might empty into moats, rivers, or simply onto the ground below the castle walls. A guardrobe is essentially a toilet built into the architecture of the building. You sit on a wooden or stone seat positioned over a hole that leads to a vertical chute. Gravity carries your waste down the chute and deposits it outside the building, where it becomes someone else's problem. The system works reasonably well for the people using it, but it creates significant problems for everyone else. The waste accumulates outside the building, creating massive piles of human waste that attract flies, rats, and other disease-carrying pests. The smell can be detected from considerable distances, and the health hazards are enormous. Castle moats, which are designed as defensive features, often become sewage systems by necessity. The waste from multiple guardrobes flows into the moat, creating a toxic barrier around the castle that's as effective at keeping people away as any defensive wall. Monasteries and other religious institutions sometimes develop more sophisticated waste management systems. Some monasteries build elaborate systems of channels and drains that carry waste away from living areas and into nearby rivers or streams. These systems represent some of the most advanced sanitation engineering of the medieval period. Public latrines in larger towns might be built over rivers, allowing the flowing water to carry waste away from populated areas. This works well for the people using the latrines, but it creates problems for people living downstream who find their water supply contaminated with the waste of entire communities. Waste disposal in medieval times isn't just a practical problem. It's a social and political issue that affects relationships between neighbors, social classes, and entire communities. In crowded urban areas, disputes over waste disposal are common. Neighbors argue over whose turn it is to clean shared latrines, who has the right to dump waste in particular areas, and who is responsible when waste disposal practices create health problems. These disputes can become violent. People have been injured or killed in fights over waste disposal rights and responsibilities. Local authorities sometimes have to intervene to mediate disputes and establish rules for waste management. Social class affects waste disposal options significantly. Wealthy people can afford private latrines, chamber pots that are emptied by servants, and homes located away from the worst waste accumulation areas. Poor people must use overcrowded public facilities and live in areas where waste disposal problems are most severe. Servants and laborers often bear the burden of waste management for their employers. They empty chamber pots, clean latrines, and handle the dirty work of waste disposal. This creates a clear class division where the wealthy generate waste and the poor deal with its disposal. Some communities attempt to regulate waste disposal through local laws and customs. Towns might designate specific areas for waste dumping, establish schedules for emptying public latrines, or require property owners to maintain clean conditions around their buildings. But enforcement of these regulations is difficult and inconsistent. Local authorities often lack the resources or motivation to address waste management problems effectively. Corruption is common with wealthy individuals paying bribes to avoid waste disposal responsibilities. The medieval approach to waste disposal creates a public health crisis that affects every aspect of life. Diseases spread rapidly through contaminated water supplies, and epidemic outbreaks regularly devastate communities. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever are common killers that spread through contaminated water and poor sanitation. These diseases can wipe out significant portions of the population during epidemic outbreaks, and they create a constant background level of illness and death in medieval communities. Parasites thrive in the unsanitary conditions created by poor waste disposal. Intestinal worms, blood flukes, and other parasites infect large percentages of the population, causing chronic illness, malnutrition, and reduced life expectancy. Skin infections and other problems result from constant exposure to contaminated environments. People develop rashes, sores, and other skin conditions from walking through waste-contaminated streets and living in unsanitary conditions. The smell and visual pollution created by poor waste disposal affect mental health and quality of life. People become accustomed to living in filthy conditions, but the psychological impact of constant exposure to waste and filth is significant. Infant and child mortality rates are particularly high, partly due to the unsanitary conditions created by poor waste disposal. Children are more vulnerable to waterborne diseases and are more likely to come into contact with contaminated materials during play and exploration. Women face special challenges during menstruation and childbirth. The lack of sanitary facilities and clean materials creates additional health risks during these vulnerable times. Infection rates are high, and many women die from complications that could be prevented with basic sanitation. Despite the challenges, medieval people developed various coping mechanisms and adaptations that help them survive in these unsanitary conditions. They learned to read the signs of contaminated water and avoid the most dangerous sources. They developed tolerance for smells and conditions that would be intolerable to modern people. They create social customs and practices that minimize the worst health impacts of poor sanitation. Some people develop folk knowledge about herbs and treatments that can help with digestive problems and other health issues related to poor sanitation. While this knowledge is often inaccurate or ineffective, it provides some psychological comfort and occasional practical benefit. Communities sometimes organize collective efforts to address the worst sanitation problems. Groups of neighbors might work together to clean shared latrines, dig new waste pits, or create drainage systems that carry waste away from living areas. Religious and cultural practices sometimes incorporate cleanliness and sanitation concepts, even if the underlying science isn't understood. Ritual washing prayers for health and religious prohibitions against certain practices can provide some protection against disease. People learn to time their activities around sanitation realities. They avoid certain areas during times when waste disposal is most active. They schedule important activities for times when disease outbreaks are less likely, and they develop routines that minimize their exposure to the worst sanitation problems. The constant exposure to unsanitary conditions also builds some resistance to disease. People who survive childhood in medieval conditions often develop stronger immune systems that help them cope with ongoing exposure to pathogens and contaminants. Despite everything you've heard about medieval people never bathing, there were times and places where cleaning actually happened. Public bathhouses did exist in many medieval towns, and they were popular gathering places that served social, hygienic, and sometimes romantic functions. When you decide to visit a bathhouse, perhaps because you're about to be married, or because you've been working with particularly foul substances, or because someone has finally told you that your smell is affecting local livestock, you enter a world that's part social club, part cleaning facility, and part medieval spa. The bathhouse is a large wooden building, often built near a source of running water. Smoke rises from multiple chimneys, and you can hear the sounds of splashing water and conversation from inside. The entrance fee is modest, equivalent to a loaf of bread, but still significant for someone living at subsistence level. Inside, the atmosphere is warm and humid. Large wooden tubs are arranged around the room, each one filled with hot water that's been heated in massive cauldrons over open fires. The water is brown and murky, not from dirt alone, but from the various herbs and substances that have been added to it for their supposed healing properties. You wait your turn for a tub, and when one becomes available, you climb in with relief. The hot water feels wonderful against your chronically dirty skin, and for the first time in months, you feel the accumulated grime beginning to loosen and dissolve, but you're not alone. Medieval bathing is a communal activity, and your tub might be shared with several other people. Strangers become intimate quickly when you're sitting naked in the same small tub, and conversations flow as freely as the bath water. The person beside you might be a merchant who's been traveling for weeks and is just as desperate for cleaning as you are. Or it might be a craftsman whose work has left him covered in substances that even medieval standards find objectionable. You share stories, gossip, and sometimes business deals while soaking in the communal water. A bathhouse attendant approaches with a rough cloth and a ball of soap made from animal fat and wood ash. The soap is harsh and burning, stripping away not just dirt, but also several layers of skin. The attendant scrubs vigorously, attacking the accumulated grime with an enthusiasm that borders on violence. The water around you turns an alarming shade of brown as months of dirt dissolve away. Your skin, revealed for the first time in ages, is pale and raw from the harsh scrubbing. You feel simultaneously cleaner and more vulnerable than you have in months. One of the most significant aspects of medieval hygiene that actually worked was the concept of clean linen. While outer garments were rarely washed, linen undergarments served as a crucial barrier between your skin and your dirty outer clothes. Linen was made from flax, a plant that produced fibers strong enough to withstand repeated washing. Unlike wool, which would shrink and felt when washed frequently, linen could be boiled, scrubbed, and beaten without being destroyed. This made it the ideal fabric for items that needed to be cleaned regularly. If you were wealthy enough to own linen undergarments, you experienced a form of cleanliness that was impossible with wool alone. The linen absorbed sweat oils and other bodily secretions before they could reach your outer clothing. When the linen became too dirty to tolerate, it could be removed and washed while you continued wearing your wool tunic. The process of washing linen was elaborate but manageable. The fabric was soaked in hot water with lye or soap, then beaten against wooden boards to loosen the dirt. It was rinsed repeatedly in clean water, then spread out to dry in the sun. The entire process took most of a day, but the result was genuinely clean fabric that felt fresh against the skin. Clean linen became a status symbol that was more important than expensive outer garments. A person wearing clean linen undergarments, even beneath a stained and worn tunic, was demonstrating both wealth and attention to hygiene. The white color of clean linen was particularly prized because it showed that the wearer could afford to keep their undergarments spotless. The smell of clean linen was distinctive and pleasant, a sharp, fresh scent that came from the lye used in washing and the sun-drying process. People learned to associate this smell with cleanliness and high social status. A whiff of clean linen could immediately identify someone as belonging to the upper classes. For those who couldn't afford linen, hemp, or cotton when available, served similar functions, though they weren't as durable or as easy to clean. Even these cheaper alternatives provided some barrier between skin and outer clothing, improving hygiene significantly. The care of linen became a specialized skill that was passed down through generations. Women learned elaborate techniques for washing, bleaching, and maintaining linen garments. They knew which herbs to add to the wash water for extra whiteness, how to remove different types of stains, and how to repair small tears without compromising the garment's integrity. Since water-based washing was difficult and often impossible, medieval people developed various methods of dry cleaning that helped maintain their appearance and reduce odors without using water. Brushing was the most common form of dry cleaning. Stiff brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers were used to remove surface dirt, dust, and debris from clothing. Regular brushing could significantly improve the appearance of garments and remove some of the accumulated grime. The brushing process was methodical and thorough. You would start at the top of a garment and work downward using firm strokes to dislodge dirt and debris. Seams and folds received special attention because dirt tended to accumulate in these areas. The process was time-consuming but effective at removing surface contamination. Beading was another common technique. Garments were hung on lines or laid on flat surfaces and beaten with wooden paddles or sticks. This helped to dislodge dirt that had become embedded in the fabric fibers. The beading also helped to fluff up compressed fabric, improving its appearance and texture. Airing was perhaps the most important form of dry cleaning. Garments were hung outside in fresh air and sunlight whenever possible. The UV rays from the sun had natural sanitizing properties, killing bacteria and other microorganisms that caused odors. Fresh air helped to dissipate accumulated smells and moisture. Medieval people learned to take advantage of different weather conditions for airing their clothes. Windy days were ideal for removing odors, while sunny days provided the sanitizing benefits of UV light. Even winter airing was beneficial, as the cold, dry air could help preserve fabrics and reduce bacterial growth. Herbal treatments were used to freshen clothes without washing them. Aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, and mint were rubbed into fabrics or sewn into small sachets that were placed among stored clothing. These herbs provided pleasant scents that masked body odors and had some antimicrobial properties. Smoke treatment was another method of fabric care. Garments were hung over smoky fires made from specific types of wood or herbs. The smoke had preservative and pest-repelling properties, helping to keep clothes free from insects and reducing bacterial growth. Certain types of smoke also imparted pleasant aromas to the fabric. Medieval life followed seasonal rhythms that included specific times for cleaning and hygiene activities. These seasonal cleaning rituals were determined by practical considerations like weather available resources and agricultural demands. Spring cleaning was a real and necessary activity in medieval times. After spending the winter in close quarters with limited ventilation, homes needed thorough cleaning to remove accumulated dirt, odors, and pests. As soon as the weather warmed enough to make the work bearable, families would undertake major cleaning projects. The spring cleaning process began with removing everything possible from the house. Bedding, clothing, and household items were carried outside to be aired, beaten, and cleaned. This allowed access to every corner of the living space for thorough cleaning. Floors received special attention during spring cleaning. The rushes that had been covering the dirt floors all winter were removed and burned. The accumulated debris underneath food scraps, animal droppings, and various unidentifiable substances was swept up and disposed of. New rushes were then laid down to provide fresh covering for the coming year. Walls and ceilings were cleaned with brushes and scraping tools to remove soot, cobwebs, and accumulated grime. This was particularly important because cooking fires had been burning continuously throughout the winter, depositing layers of smoke and grease on every surface. Summer cleaning focused on dealing with increased pest activity and the challenges of hot weather. This was the season for washing clothes and bedding when hot weather made the drying process faster and more reliable. Large items like blankets and cloaks were washed during summer when they could be dried thoroughly before being stored for winter. The warm weather also made it more comfortable to go without these items while they were being cleaned. Autumn cleaning was preparation for winter. Clothes and bedding needed to be in the best possible condition before the cold season when washing would become more difficult. This was also the time for major repairs to clothing and household items. Winter cleaning was limited but still necessary. Since washing was difficult in cold weather, winter cleaning focused on brushing, airing when possible, and managing pest problems that were exacerbated by close indoor living. The medieval church had a complex and sometimes contradictory relationship with cleanliness and hygiene. Different religious traditions and interpretations led to varying attitudes toward washing clothing and personal care. Some religious orders emphasized cleanliness as a form of spiritual discipline. These monks and nuns believed that maintaining clean bodies and clothing was a way of honoring God and showing respect for the divine gift of life. They developed elaborate rules for personal hygiene and created some of the most advanced washing facilities of the medieval period. Cistercian monasteries, for example, were famous for their sophisticated water management systems. They built elaborate networks of channels, drains, and washing facilities that provided clean water for drinking, cooking, and washing. These systems were engineering marvels that demonstrated the importance these religious communities placed on cleanliness. Other religious traditions took the opposite approach, viewing physical discomfort and filth as forms of spiritual penance. These ascetic practices were based on the belief that suffering in this world would lead to rewards in the next. Monks and nuns who followed these traditions deliberately avoided washing and wore hair shirts designed to irritate the skin. The contrast between these different approaches could be dramatic. In a single region, you might find one monastery where the residents bathed regularly and maintained spotless clothing, while another monastery housed individuals who hadn't washed in years and considered their accumulated filth to be a sign of spiritual devotion. Pilgrimage traditions also affected hygiene practices. Pilgrims were expected to undergo purification rituals before embarking on their journeys, which often included bathing and donning clean clothes. However, the journey itself was meant to be penitential, so pilgrims often deliberately avoided washing during their travels. Religious festivals sometimes included cleansing rituals that provided opportunities for hygiene activities. Easter preparations, for example, traditionally included washing and donning clean clothes as symbols of spiritual renewal. These religious motivations gave people socially acceptable reasons to engage in cleaning activities that might otherwise be viewed as unnecessary luxury. The church's attitude toward public bathhouses was generally negative. Religious authorities viewed these establishments as sources of moral corruption, places where men and women might interact inappropriately and where various forms of sinful behavior took place. This religious opposition contributed to the decline of public bathing facilities. Religious texts and sermons sometimes addressed hygiene issues, though usually in metaphorical terms. Cleanliness of the soul was emphasized much more than cleanliness of the body, but the connection between the two was sometimes acknowledged. Soap was one of the most important luxury items in medieval society, and understanding its production, distribution, and use provides insight into the economics of cleanliness in this period. Medieval soap was made through a complex chemical process that required specific ingredients and considerable skill. The basic ingredients were animal fats, usually from cattle or pigs, and lye made from wood ash. The process required heating these ingredients together in precise proportions until they underwent saponification, the chemical reaction that creates soap. The quality of medieval soap varied enormously depending on the skill of the soap maker and the quality of the ingredients. The best soaps were made from pure animal fats and carefully prepared lye. Lower quality soaps might include various adulterants or be made from inferior fats that produced harsh, irritating products. Soap production was concentrated in certain regions that had access to the necessary raw materials. Areas with large cattle or pig populations could provide the animal fats, while regions with abundant forests could supply the wood ash needed for lye production. The most famous soap-producing region was the area around Marseille in southern France, which developed a reputation for producing high-quality soap made from olive oil rather than animal fat. This Castile soap was softer and less irritating than animal fat soaps, but it was also much more expensive. The cost of soap made it a luxury item that was beyond the reach of most medieval people. A bar of soap might cost the equivalent of several days' wages for a common laborer. This high cost meant that soap was used sparingly even by those who could afford it. The distribution of soap followed trade routes that connected production centers with markets in larger towns and cities. Soap was typically sold by traveling merchants who carried small quantities of this valuable commodity along with other luxury goods. The use of soap was often ceremonial or reserved for special occasions. A wealthy family might use soap for wedding preparations, religious festivals, or when hosting important guests. Regular use of soap for daily hygiene was virtually unknown except among the very wealthy. Alternative cleaning agents were more commonly used for regular washing. Wood ash mixed with water created a basic cleaning solution that was effective at removing dirt and grease, though it was harsh on the skin. Various plants and herbs were also used for their cleansing properties. The scarcity and high cost of soap created a thriving market in used and recycled cleaning products. Soap scraps were carefully saved and combined with other materials to create cleaning compounds. Even water that had been used for washing with soap was saved and reused for less demanding cleaning tasks. When washing did occur in medieval times, it involved technologies and techniques that were remarkably sophisticated, even if they were labor-intensive and time-consuming. The basic washing setup consisted of several large wooden tubs or basins, a source of hot water, and various tools for scrubbing and beating clothes. The process began with sorting clothes by fabric type and level of dirtiness, as different materials required different treatment. Linen items were typically washed separately from wool because they could withstand more aggressive treatment. Linen could be boiled in large cauldrons with lye or soap, then beaten against wooden boards to loosen embedded dirt. The beating was done with wooden paddles or bats, and the force of the blows helped to work the cleaning agents through the fabric fibers. Wool required much gentler treatment to prevent shrinking and felting. Woolen garments were washed in warm, not hot water with mild soap, and they were squeezed rather than beaten to remove dirt. The washing process for wool was more similar to modern hand washing techniques. The washing boards used for scrubbing were carved with ridges and grooves that helped to work dirt out of fabrics. These boards were often made from hardwoods that could withstand repeated use and harsh chemicals. The design of washing boards varied by region, with different patterns of ridges optimized for different types of fabrics. Rinsing was a crucial part of the washing process that required large quantities of clean water. Clothes had to be rinsed multiple times to remove all traces of soap or lye, which could irritate the skin if left in the fabric. The rinsing process often required more water than the initial washing. Drying techniques were adapted to local climate conditions and available space. In areas with reliable sunshine, clothes were spread on bushes, rocks, or rough clotheslines to dry. In northern climates or during winter, clothes might be dried indoors near fires, though this created problems with smoke and limited space. Bleaching was accomplished through a combination of lye treatment and sun exposure. White linen items were spread on grass in direct sunlight after washing, and the combination of residual lye and UV rays helped to whiten the fabric. This process, called grass bleaching, could take several days but produced remarkably white results. Starch was sometimes used to stiffen fabrics after washing. Medieval starch was made from various sources, including wheat, rice, or root vegetables. The starch gave fabrics a crisp feel and helped them maintain their shape, but it also made them more attractive to insects and more difficult to clean. Many modern misconceptions about medieval hygiene have persisted despite historical evidence to the contrary. Understanding these myths helps us better appreciate the real challenges and solutions of medieval cleanliness. The myth that medieval people never bathed is perhaps the most persistent misconception. While bathing was certainly less frequent than modern standards, it did occur regularly among certain populations and for specific purposes. Public bathhouses were common in many medieval towns, and private bathing occurred when resources allowed. The belief that medieval people didn't understand the connection between cleanliness and health is also partially incorrect. While they didn't understand germ theory, medieval people did recognize that cleanliness was connected to health and social standing. Medical texts of the period often recommended washing for various ailments. The idea that medieval people were universally dirty ignores the significant class distinctions in hygiene practices. While peasants might rarely wash their outer clothing, wealthy individuals had access to clean linen soap and washing facilities that allowed them to maintain relatively high standards of cleanliness. The misconception that medieval people didn't care about appearance overlooks the significant attention paid to clothing, grooming, and personal presentation. Fashion was important in medieval society, and people spent considerable resources on their appearance, even if their definition of attractiveness differed from modern standards. Some myths about medieval hygiene actually reflect the conditions of later periods rather than the Middle Ages proper. The worst sanitary conditions in European cities often occurred during the early modern period when urban populations had grown beyond the capacity of medieval sanitation systems. The belief that medieval hygiene practices were uniformly irrational ignores the practical considerations that shape these practices. Many seemingly strange hygiene customs made sense given the limitations of medieval technology resources and understanding of disease. Understanding the real history of medieval hygiene helps us appreciate both the challenges faced by people of this period and the ingenious solutions they developed within their limitations. After living this medieval life for months or years, the cumulative effect of poor hygiene becomes a defining characteristic of your existence. You're not just dirty, you're transformed by the experience of constant uncleanliness in ways that affect every aspect of your being. Your skin has become tough and leathery, adapted to constant irritation from rough clothing and exposure to harsh elements. What would have been painful scratches or abrasions when you first began this medieval life now barely register as minor discomforts. Your hands are permanently stained and cracked. Your feet are calloused beyond recognition, and your entire body has developed an armor-like quality that protects you from the harsh realities of medieval life. Your sense of smell has adapted dramatically to your environment. You've become nose-blind to your own odor and to the general aromatic landscape of medieval life. What once would have been overwhelming smells now fade into the background of daily experience. You can distinguish between different types of bad smells, the difference between rotting food and human waste, between smoke and cooking odors, between the scent of illness and the scent of hard work. Your tolerance for physical discomfort has increased exponentially. The constant low-level irritation from fleas, lice, and rough clothing has raised your baseline for what constitutes real discomfort. Minor injuries that would have seemed significant in your previous life are now barely worth noticing. You've learned to function effectively while dealing with multiple sources of physical irritation simultaneously. Your social relationships have been shaped by the shared experience of uncleanliness. You've developed deep bonds with family and community members based partly on mutual assistance with hygiene challenges. You've learned to read social cues that are invisible to outsiders, the subtle signs that indicate someone is sicker than usual or that they've recently had access to better washing facilities. Your daily routines have been completely restructured around the realities of medieval hygiene. You wake up expecting to be dirty and uncomfortable. You plan your day around the need to manage various bodily functions without modern conveniences. You go to sleep knowing that tomorrow will bring the same challenges and discomforts, and you've learned to find satisfaction and meaning within these constraints. Your medieval hygiene experience follows predictable seasonal patterns that create an annual cycle of different types of uncleanliness and discomfort. Winter is the season of accumulated filth. The cold weather makes washing nearly impossible, and you spend months adding layers of dirt and odor without any opportunity for significant cleaning. Your clothes become stiff with frozen sweat and accumulated grime. Your skin develops a protective coating of oils and dirt that serves as insulation against the cold. But winter also brings a certain solidarity. Everyone is equally dirty, equally uncomfortable, and equally challenged by the harsh conditions. There's a democratic quality to winter filth that levels social distinctions and creates shared understanding. Spring brings the first opportunities for serious cleaning, but it also brings new challenges. The melting snow and spring rains create mud that penetrates every aspect of daily life. You're simultaneously cleaner and dirtier than you've been in months cleaner because you finally have access to water for washing, dirtier because you're constantly exposed to mud and moisture. Summer offers the best opportunities for hygiene, but also creates new problems. The heat makes your accumulated odors more intense and noticeable. You sweat constantly, but you also have access to warm water and drying conditions that make washing more practical. This is the season when social distinctions based on cleanliness become most apparent. Autumn is preparation season. You know that winter is coming, and you try to clean yourself and your possessions as thoroughly as possible before the cold weather makes such activities impossible. There's an urgency to autumn cleaning that reflects the knowledge that you'll have to live with the results for the next 6 months. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of medieval hygiene is how completely you adapt to conditions that would seem intolerable to someone from a cleaner era. The human capacity for adaptation allows you to not just survive, but to find satisfaction and meaning within these challenging circumstances. You develop a different relationship with your body, one that's based on function rather than comfort. Your body becomes a tool for survival rather than a source of pleasure or aesthetic satisfaction. You learn to ignore or work around physical discomforts that would be debilitating for someone who hadn't adapted to them. Your expectations about comfort and cleanliness adjust completely to your circumstances. What once seemed like basic necessities, clean water, soap, privacy for bodily functions, become luxury items that are appreciated when available, but not expected as rights. You find new sources of satisfaction and pride. A successful harvest is more satisfying than any modern convenience. A warm, dry shelter is more valuable than the finest luxury goods. The simple pleasure of clean clothes becomes more intense than any modern indulgence. Your social values shift to emphasize qualities that are achievable within your circumstances. Physical strength, endurance, practical skills, and community cooperation become more important than personal attractiveness or individual comfort. You learn to judge people by their character and abilities rather than their appearance or cleanliness. You develop philosophical perspectives that help you cope with constant discomfort. Whether through religious faith, stoic acceptance, or simple pragmatism, you find ways to maintain mental stability and emotional well-being despite challenging physical circumstances. As you live through this medieval experience, it's worth remembering that you're participating in the normal human condition for most of recorded history. The standards of cleanliness and comfort that seem basic to modern people are actually recent innovations that would seem miraculous to medieval eyes. Your medieval ancestors weren't ignorant or lazy. They were making rational choices within the constraints of their technology, resources, and understanding. The hygiene practices that seem inadequate by modern standards actually represented significant achievements given the limitations they faced. The development of modern hygiene was a gradual process that took centuries and required advances in multiple fields: chemistry, engineering, medicine, and manufacturing. Each improvement built on previous innovations and was made possible by increasing wealth and technological capability. The transition from medieval to modern hygiene wasn't smooth or universal. Different regions and social classes adopted new practices at different rates, and some traditional practices persisted long after better alternatives became available. Even today, billions of people live without access to modern sanitation and hygiene facilities. Understanding medieval hygiene helps us appreciate both how far human civilization has progressed and how recent these advances really are. The clean, comfortable life that modern people take for granted is a historical anomaly that required enormous investments in infrastructure, technology, and social organization. Living through this medieval hygiene experience teaches valuable lessons about human adaptability, the relationship between technology and quality of life, and the social construction of cleanliness standards. You learn that humans are remarkably adaptable creatures who can find ways to live meaningful lives under almost any circumstances. The challenges of medieval hygiene that seem overwhelming from a modern perspective become manageable when they're part of daily reality rather than temporary hardships. You discover that many of the things considered essential for human dignity and well-being are actually cultural constructs that vary dramatically across time and place. Privacy, cleanliness, and comfort are not universal human needs, but rather specific expectations that develop under particular circumstances. You gain appreciation for the complexity and interconnectedness of modern life. Simple conveniences like clean water, soap, and toilet paper require vast networks of production, distribution, and infrastructure that medieval people couldn't have imagined. You understand that progress is not inevitable and that the advances in hygiene and sanitation that modern people enjoy could be lost if the systems that support them fail. The medieval experience reminds us that civilization is fragile and requires constant effort to maintain. You develop humility about the achievements of your own era. Just as medieval people made the best choices available to them within their constraints, future generations may look back on current practices with the same mixture of sympathy and bewilderment that modern people feel toward medieval hygiene. As another medieval day draws to a close, you prepare for sleep with the same routine you followed for months. You empty the chamber pot one final time, adding your contribution to the aromatic symphony of the medieval night. You scratch your various insect bites, adjust your rough clothing, and settle into your straw mattress with its familiar population of fleas and mice. You're dirty, smelly, and uncomfortable by any modern standard, but you're also adapted to your circumstances in ways that would be impossible for someone who hadn't lived through this experience. You've learned to find rest despite physical discomfort, to maintain social relationships despite universal uncleanliness, and to find meaning and satisfaction within severe limitations. Your body bears the marks of medieval life, the stained and cracked hands, the calloused feet, the skin toughened by constant irritation. But you've also developed strengths and capabilities that would be remarkable by modern standards. You can work all day in conditions that would debilitate a modern person. You can function effectively while dealing with multiple health challenges simultaneously. Tomorrow will bring more of the same challenges, and you'll meet them with the same combination of resignation, ingenuity, and stubborn determination that has carried you through every other medieval day. You'll wake up dirty, get dirtier throughout the day, and go to bed dirty again because that's simply what life is in this time and place. But you'll also wake up as part of a community that shares these challenges and has developed remarkable ways of coping with them. You'll participate in economic and social systems that function effectively despite their limitations. You'll contribute to the gradual development of technologies and practices that will eventually make life easier for future generations. As you drift off to sleep, listening to the familiar sounds of your family breathing, snoring, and shifting in their beds, you're participating in the normal human experience for most of recorded history. You're learning lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the true necessities of human life that no textbook could teach. And perhaps most importantly, you're gaining an appreciation for the remarkable achievements of modern civilization and the enormous efforts required to create and maintain the clean, comfortable world that your descendants will inherit. And so ends our journey through the aromatic landscape of medieval hygiene. We've walked in the shoes or bare feet of people who lived in a world where soap was a luxury, bathing was dangerous, and personal space was measured in inches rather than feet. It's a world that challenges every assumption we have about cleanliness, comfort, and basic human dignity. Yet it's also a world where people found ways to love work, create, and build communities despite conditions that would seem impossible to modern sensibilities. The next time you step into a hot shower, brush your teeth with fluoride toothpaste, or simply flush a toilet, remember the medieval person who would have considered these simple acts to be miracles beyond imagination. Remember the generations of human ingenuity, struggle, and gradual progress that made your clean, comfortable life possible. And perhaps most importantly, remember that the people who lived through these challenging times were not so different from you. They had the same hopes, fears, and dreams that drive human life in any era. They simply had to pursue those dreams while scratching their flea bites and breathing through their mouths to avoid the worst of the medieval aromatic experience. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be free from lice, fleas, and the sounds of chamber pots being emptied in the street below. You live in remarkable times, even if you don't always remember to appreciate just how remarkable they really are. Sleep well, and tomorrow, when you wake up clean and comfortable, take just a moment to appreciate the miracle of modern hygiene. Your medieval ancestors would be amazed by your good fortune, and they'd probably be a little jealous of your indoor plumbing too.